Willie and I are joined right now by the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings of Maryland. Elijah, welcome back to the show. It's great to see you. What's next? I mean, after what you've seen in this report, what stands out to you as the next line of questions?
Well, first of all, I'm very pleased that Jerry Nadler is now subpoenaing the unredacted record and all the documents that underlie the Mueller decision. And then, of course, I know that he's going to bring Barr in, and we need to hear from him. But I think we have got to, the thing that we have to do, Mika, is look at the roadmap that has been created for us with the Mueller report. But first, we've got to make sure we understand how those decisions were made. But I agree with you. I was so disappointed in Attorney General Barr. It was it was phenomenal. And most lawyers will tell you that part of our duty is we are always officers of the court. And that means that we always are supposed to be telling the truth. And I just found that Attorney General Barr went overboard in trying to represent the president when he should have been representing the people of the United States of America. Hey, so what we will do is we want to do a deep dig in our committee, because we want to figure out whether or not there were conflicts of interest, and that comes directly under our jurisdiction. We're wondering whether the president, when he makes certain decisions, whether he's making them in the interest of the American people or making them in the interest of himself. And so we've got a lot of other things we're going to look into. And the other committees, and of course, we will back up Schiff and Intelligence, Congressman Schiff and Congressman Nadler in Judiciary as they proceed, because they're the two committees that have most jurisdiction over this matter.
Mr. Chairman, it's Willie Geist. Good to see you as always this morning. As you know, there were two volumes to the Mueller report, the first dealing with potential conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, the second dealing with obstruction. Mr. Mueller found in Volume 1, and he said pretty explicitly, that he did not establish a criminal conspiracy or coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Do you accept the special counsel's conclusion on that point? To a degree, but again, we need more information. Clearly, I think part of the problem here is that we've had so many lies coming from this president and some of the people that work for him. But clearly, think about one. The president said from the very beginning that he had no relationship or no business dealings with Russia. And come on, give me a break. And now we see what has now come forward. I think that there may have been, and I think there were two folks, that is Russia and the campaign, both wanting to have a certain end. And the question is whether it met a criminal standard based on what they had to say. But just because something does not meet the criminal standard does not mean that we should tolerate it. So it didn't.
Not in the presidency.
Yeah, I think everything you said is true, and all the lies are outlined and the evidence is in the report. But the conclusion from the special counsel, who I know you have a lot of respect for, was that he could not establish any coordination or conspiracy. Do you accept at least his conclusion on that?
Yes.
And then on the obstruction question, Mr. Chairman, what remains open to you as you read through Volume 2? What questions do you have?
I want to see exactly why it was that we've got these 10 areas, which shows that there was clearly efforts to obstruct. And I think Joe said it a little bit earlier, I can't think of anybody in this whole country that if they had done maybe one or two of those things in the 10 that Mueller cites, that would not be indicted today. No doubt about it. And I understand he's the president, but I think the thing that's so frustrating, and must have been frustrating for Mueller, the reason why he could not bring the charges or recommend the charges, one of the reasons is the efforts by the president and his team. Keep in mind, he said that the president would not, he tried for a year to get the president to sit down with him. And on the other hand, the president's running around the country. I want to testify. I want to come before Mueller. And now we see the real picture. There's another thing that happened. There apparently has been some destruction of evidence. That's another thing that we want to look into. Again, you know, there's a Presidential Records Act, and I want to know who was destroying evidence. That's another thing that stopped Mueller from being able to complete his job. And a lot of this stuff may have been directed by the president. And so,
well, of course,
and by the way,
that's not even speculation. What you guys said there. Yeah, go ahead, Elijah.
Right. By the way, that to me, when I've got a president who's sitting in the Oval Office, who's directing people to lie and to be deceitful, that's not leadership. And I think the American people have to understand that we cannot allow that to happen.
Yeah, I just want viewers watching that heard you say, Elijah, that Robert Mueller couldn't come to some of his conclusions because some evidence had been destroyed or tampered with or not turned over. That's not your opinion. That actually came out in the report itself. And there's so many instances of obstruction of justice. I want to take everybody back to when you and I worked together and worked in Congress together. We also were friends during the impeachment of Bill Clinton. That's right. I voted for 2 articles of impeachment. You didn't. My standard then is my standard now, which is if a working class guy couldn't get away with lying in a grand jury, then the president shouldn't. And of course, there were differences in the way we all approach that. But Elijah, could you just explain to people that weren't around in 1999, forget the personal side of it, let's just talk about the abuse of public trust. How much worse Donald Trump's examples of obstruction of justice were compared to Bill Clinton's? Because I was there, and again, I voted for 2 of the 4 articles of impeachment. But I am here to tell everybody there is no comparison. Lindsey Graham running around trying to clean this up for Donald Trump. He was prosecuting Bill Clinton in the Senate for something that pales in comparison to what we read about yesterday.
And Joe, I would say it's at least what President Trump has done at least 100 times worse, at least.
At least.
Certainly,
at least.
And then the thing that bothered me, by the way, about Barr, he seemed very sympathetic to the fact that the president came with somewhat of a cloud over his head and being investigated. Well, he did that to himself.
Well, Elijah, not only that, you remember when Barack Obama got elected president, the majority leader of the Senate said,
that's right,
our job is to make sure he doesn't get reelected. When Bill Clinton got elected in 1992, I mean, Republicans never, ever gave him a break. And I was one of those who from the very beginning went after him. Donald Trump does not deserve protection from his attorney general because people play hardball in Washington, D.C.
And want the truth.
That's right. That's right. And want the truth. And Mika, I'm glad you said that, because that's what we are in search of. Our president has spent the last 2 years or more spewing out over 9,000 lies, according to the Washington Post. And at some point, those lies have a detrimental effect on the very people that we represent. And so we have a duty to dig deep. I think people should not be celebrating with the president as he runs around saying no collusion, no collusion. And they need to understand that Mueller made 14 referrals, criminal referrals, of things that he obviously believed that there is some kind of reasonable evidence
that they need to be looking into these other U.S. attorneys' offices. Those things are still open. But there's something else that's happening here, Joe, and I gotta get this out. One of the things that we've got to really be careful about is this president now probably feels emboldened. In other words, he said, oh, I got away with this, and so he feels that he can get away with anything. Second, he probably feels emboldened because a lot of our Republican friends who will not lift a finger against him, as a matter of fact, they have acted as defense counsel for him. They now say, oh, everything's fine. We've got to keep on doing what we're doing. Well, I'm in disagreement with that. We've got to go against this. We've got to expose it. A lot of people keep asking about the question of impeachment. We may very well come to that very soon. But right now, let's make sure we understand what Mueller was doing, understand what Barr was doing, and see the report in an unredacted form and all of the underlying documents.
Well, Elijah, and I'm grateful that actually the process has played itself out in such a way that you and Nadler and Nancy Pelosi and other leaders are going to get a chance to look at the Mueller report and decide what constitutional steps you take. However, I want to follow up on something you just said, because I'm not so concerned about the fact that the Attorney General of the United States made a fool of himself yesterday, because he's a clown. Everybody knows he's a clown, okay? And you still get the report. And you're still going to be able to act constitutional on that. This is my question to you. How do you, as chairman of the Oversight Committee, how does Jerry Nadler, as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, how does Nancy Pelosi, as Speaker of the House, how do you all hold this reckless and out of control Attorney General to account if suddenly he starts killing investigations in the Southern District of New York or in other jurisdictions that may prove to be embarrassing to Donald Trump or his family?
Joe, that is a great question. I'm not sure how we do it, but one of the things I know we do have to do is that we have to continue to expose to the public what is going on here overall, and hope that the public chimes in on this, because, again, the Republicans are not going to help. And so I'm not sure. We may end up, in some instances, in appropriate instances, in the courts. I don't know. I'm not sure. But we're going to figure all of that out. But there's something else that's happening here, Joe. This administration will not give us one shred of paper when we ask for documents. Not a shred. They don't even acknowledge the fact that we asked for them. And that's dangerous, because in this last election, Joe, what happened was the American people said, you know what? Even the people who like Donald Trump say, you know what? We want some accountability. But, Joe, you sat on government reform. You cannot have accountability unless you have information. They do not want us to interview one government witness, not one. And so they've blocked us in every way. The American people cannot stand for that, and we will not stand for that.
So, Elijah, and your committee will be certainly the ones on the forefront of getting answers to questions, whether it takes subpoenas or whatever. I'm just listening to this conversation, and having read this report, it exposes so much about how this president operates, how this presidency functions, and it is so troubling and so disturbing. More evidence that he has lackeys in the White House who lie to the country for him. Sarah Sanders, the White House press secretary, lying to the American people and then having to admit under oath that she does that. And also evidence that for the sake of the truth and for the sake of protecting this democracy and the rule of law, that his staff members, like his attorney, Don McGahn, have to undermine him or not respect his wishes in order to keep this presidency or the rule of law or democratic norms intact. It is so frightening, and I wonder where you begin with questions that you need answers to as head of oversight.
Well, again, we're looking at some questions with regard to conflicts of interest.
We have now subpoenaed the accounting records from the Trump Organization's accountants. And again, Mika, the Republicans did something that was unprecedented. After we made the request, sent the subpoena for records, records of the Trump Organization, they then sent a letter to the accountant saying, basically, don't give them any records. Joe, you know that's unheard of. As a matter of fact, a lot of people will sit there and say, Cummings, well, what did you do when you were in the minority? I joined in with the Republicans on at least 700 letters trying to get documents and do investigations. Why? Because it's my job. That's what I'm supposed to do. And we have not, I've never seen the minority come in and try to block the majority from doing its job. But when they do that, they not only block the majority, they also block the minority. I mean, they keep forgetting that we are an independent body and that we are co-equal to the executive branch. And it is our duty to be a check on that branch. And I'm not going to give that up. Not me.
Yeah, let me ask you, Elijah. You and I, you were just talking about us working together. We work together, obviously, very closely on government reform and always communicated, always, always shared information. I've got to ask you, though, could you ever have imagined in all of your years in Congress that you would ever work with Republicans that would care less about getting the truth out to the American people and work more to obstruct Congress's efforts in pursuing their Article I powers to have oversight over the presidency and the executive branch?
Joe, I never imagined it. And Joe, as you well know, and not only that, Joe, we are now trying to look at these prices of prescription drugs and how they're skyrocketing. We sent a request for documents from the pharmaceutical companies so we could find out more information about how they're pricing their drugs. And my colleagues on the Republican side also sent the pharmaceutical companies letters saying, don't cooperate with Cummings. Don't cooperate. In other words, they would rather protect the pharmaceutical companies than protect their own constituents. There's something wrong with that picture, and it's very painful. And, you know, the thing that we have to do, we got to look at the big picture here. Where will we be after Trump is gone? Where will we be?
Yeah.
Will our laws be all shattered? Will we have a lower standard for our presidency? And so what we need to do as a Congress is also figure out if there are loopholes. We need to try to figure out loopholes in the laws. We need to figure out how to patch those and deal with those loopholes, because we cannot have this. The thing, security clearances, same thing. They don't want to give us any information on security clearances. That goes to the security of every person in this country, and in some instances in the world. But they don't want to. They do not want to give us one syllable with regard to documents. That is dangerous.
Yes, it is. Elijah, in what surely is a coincidence, during our last block discussing the president's pushback at the White House counsel for taking notes, the president has been tweeting about this very issue in real time.
I never watches the show.
And he continued using a curse word. Quote, I never agreed to testify. It's not necessary for me to respond to statements made in the report about me, some of which are total bull blank and only given to make the other person look good or to make me look bad. This was an illegally started hoax that should have never happened. So the president, who claims total exoneration, is angrily cursing on social media.
On social media,
Elijah,
but he's doing that, Mika, while, of course, his campaign manager is in jail. He's doing that while his national security director actually had to plead guilty and cooperate. He did that while, I mean, you name it. His foreign policy people. I mean, there were so many people around him his personal fixer.
Yeah.
All of them, either
Elijah,
in jail or going to jail.
I can't help but to be worried as we go through this process methodically, going through this report and then watching oversight do its job, how he behaves and what might happen.
I think it's. I think we are in a very difficult time in this country's history, and I'm begging the American people to pay attention to what's going on. I often say that people are going to look back at this time 200 years from now and ask the question, what did you do to reverse this? You on MSNBC have been doing a great job of exposing what's going on. Part of what I have to do in my committee is let the nation see what's going on through our president and the ramifications of it. And as I told the president when I met with him 2 years ago, I said, Mr. President, you know, I am 67 then, and I said, here you are 70. I said, the greatest gift that we can leave to our children is a democracy that is intact. And at the rate we're going, it won't be there. And I'm begging the American people to become a part of this process. Notify your congressman. Tell them that you want to make sure that we address this issue in an effective and efficient way.
I have chills. Chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Elijah Cummings, thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Elijah.
Happy holiday to you all.
Happy holiday to
Happy
you,
holidays.
too. Have a blessed Easter.
All right. There is much more Morning Joe straight ahead. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.